Why did no one look at her when the briefing ended? They spoke in clusters, all low voices and flicking eyes, but not toward her. Not once. The wall map glowed pale under the overhead light, the lines of northern Mexico cut into a grid of nothing. Her name wasn't even on the mission sheet, only a call sign. Raven. Outside, desert heat pressed against the windows like an impatient hand. Inside, the air smelled of dry coffee, gun oil, and the heavy silence of people pretending they weren't afraid. Maya Torres stood still, arms folded, eyes fixed on the satellite photo in front of her. It was always easier to study coordinates than faces. The lieutenant finally cleared his throat. "You know the plan," he said, his tone brisk, not looking directly at her. "Extraction of an American advisor, in and out before noon. Keep comms clean, no heroics." Heroics? She almost smiled. It was always the ones who'd never seen real chaos who used that word. When the others left, she stayed a second longer. Her reflection in the glass didn't look like a soldier, just a woman with steady eyes and the weight of too many hours awake. She reached up and traced one fingertip against the outline of the mission zone. The Sonoran Desert. Empty. Indifferent. It didn't care about rank or gender or what patch sat on your sleeve. It just stripped away what didn't matter. And maybe that was why she'd always felt at home there. She'd grown up just north of it, Tucson, Arizona, where heat was a constant language and silence meant more than words. Her father used to say the desert didn't teach patience. It demanded it. He was a retired Army Ranger, the kind of man who never raised his voice but somehow filled every room he walked into. "Pain isn't an enemy," he once told her when she was 16, fingers wrapped around a pair of rusted dumbbells in their backyard. "It's just the teacher that never leaves early." She hadn't understood it then, but she would. Now, standing in that briefing room, she could almost hear his voice again. Quiet, sure, the sound of authority that didn't shout. Her headset buzzed. The convoy was rolling in 10. She gathered her gear without a word, the small pack, the sidearm, the folded map already marked with hand-drawn lines. A decade in the field had burned one truth into her bones. You prepare for the plan, and then you prepare for it to fall apart. Outside, the morning light came up hard over the dunes. A convoy of unmarked vehicles idled by the gate, engines low and restless. 2 SUVs, a pickup, and a Land Cruiser in the rear. She slid into the back seat, checked the latch on her rifle, adjusted the strap on her wristwatch, the one with tiny ink marks etched inside the leather. Coordinates, escape azimuths, survival bearings. The kind of details you only memorized because someday you might be alone. The driver glanced at her in the mirror. "Hot one today, Sergeant." She didn't answer. He didn't try again. The convoy moved. Tires kicked up thin veils of dust that hung in the air like ghosts. They passed through miles of scrub and thorn, the kind of country that swallowed noise and gave back heat. Every bump in the road felt like the desert testing their balance. 10 miles in, the lead SUV called back, visual on smoke ahead, possible locals burning brush. But the smoke wasn't rising right, too controlled, too symmetrical. Maya leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Hold speed, don't close distance yet." The lieutenant glanced at her from the front passenger seat. "You think it's staged?" She didn't reply, she watched. The shapes resolved slowly, 3 tires burning across the dirt road, black smoke curling into the blue. Behind them, a rusted sedan parked sideways. She exhaled through her nose. "That's not brush fire." He hesitated. "Orders." "Pause," she said softly. "Check the ground before the block." The driver slowed. Dust blew past the windshield. And there, just ahead of the tires, she saw it. Sand that had been tamped down by a shovel, not wind. Smooth where it should have been rough. Her stomach tightened. "Back it up," she said, calm but firm. He'd only reversed 3 meters when the world detonated. A flash, a punch, then sound deafening, shattering. The front SUV lifted into the air like a toy kicked by a giant hand. Its windshield exploded into glittering shards. The second truck swerved, slammed into a thorn trunk. Maya's head snapped back against the seat. For a heartbeat, the air turned white. "Contact front, brake," someone screamed over comms, then gunfire, not random, disciplined, coordinated. Rounds chewed into metal. The desert lit up with ricochets. "Smoke out," the team leader barked. White grenades hissed, filling the air with clouds that melted instantly in the heat. Maya dropped low, sliding out of the Land Cruiser, rifle tight to her chest. "Comms check," she snapped. "Hit," came a voice, Corporal Huxley, her comm tech. "Left forearm, I can still work." "Stay with me," she ordered. "Push our traffic to backup net." Bullets stitched the sand near her boots. She rolled behind a wheel rut, eyes scanning. 12 shooters, maybe more. 2 trucks with high-mounted guns. "Left ridge 2 with belts," she called. "Right wash 3 with rifles." Her words cut through the chaos like coordinates on a map. Another blast ripped the road behind them. Not a kill charge, just a denial. Boxed in. And then through the static of her headset came a new voice. Calm, mocking, English with a smile hidden in it. "U.S. soldiers," it said. "Drop your weapons, we only want to talk." She froze. That voice wasn't theirs. It was on their frequency. They stolen a handset. She keyed her mic twice, the silent Delta signal meaning comms compromised. Nothing came back, just breath. The team leader crawled beside her, bleeding through his sleeve. "Raven, we need an exit." She scanned, left too high, right too deep, rear blocked. "Through the wash," she said. They moved, crouched quick. Bullets sang past their ears. She threw smoke, dropped after it, hit the sand hard. From the haze, a shadow lunged, bandana, rifle too close. He saw a small soldier, not a threat. She let him grab. Then she turned his momentum back into him, twisting the rifle across his chest and driving her boot into his knee. He folded, gasping. She didn't finish him. There wasn't time. "Hux," she called. "Crawl, stay low." They slid 30 meters down the wash. Then headlights flared above, a pickup cresting the ridge. "Back," she shouted. But it was too late. A rope snaked down from the truck bed, looped around Hux's boot, and yanked him forward like a hooked fish. She reached, fingers grazed his pant leg, but the air filled with rounds. "Go," he shouted. She didn't. She watched him dragged into the open, his voice strangled by dust. Then silence. The world contracted. Her rifle hit the ground. Hands grabbed her shoulders. Zip ties bit into her wrists. Boots drove her to her knees. Voices, Spanish, laughter. The sound of men who thought cruelty proved strength. A face appeared above her, mirrored sunglasses, smirk. "You Delta Force," he said. "Always so tough. Let's see how tough you are without water." He spat near her boot. Somewhere behind him, someone laughed too loud. She said nothing. He yanked her name tape from her chest and flicked it into the sand. Someone else tugged at her dog tags. The chain wouldn't break, so they cut it and threw them away. "Where is your bravery now?" one asked. She looked up, not at him, through him. That look unsettled him more than any curse. They took everything that made her modern, her gear, her radio, her sidearm. They thought stripping her meant victory. They didn't understand. Her strength wasn't something they could take. Hux was still alive, barely. She saw him slumped near a wall, arm bound with a rag. He met her eyes once, guilt in every breath. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," she said softly. "Just breathe." He did. The lieutenant arrived last, the kind of man who thought charm was power. Clean boots, expensive pistol, lazy smile. "American," he said, almost kind. "Special, elite." He looked her over like she was a machine to be inspected. "You look ordinary. I thought Delta soldiers were tall." She met his gaze, You thought wrong. He smiled wider. We will find out. He gave a small wave. Two men grabbed her arms, lifted her to her feet, and dragged her toward a waiting truck. Inside the compound, she saw a wall of brick, a tarp for shade, a handful of men pretending to be soldiers. They asked questions she didn't answer. They slapped her lazy blows that insulted their own intention. She counted each one without blinking. They wanted fear, she gave them patience. When they grew bored, the lieutenant leaned close and whispered, "The sun will finish what we can't." Then he pointed east, 80 kilometers, civilization if you can call it that. He motioned toward the desert. "Give her a head start," he said lightly. They threw her into the back of a pickup, drove until the compound vanished behind waves of heat, and stopped. The lieutenant tossed 2 bottles into the sand, just out of reach. "You Delta Force," he repeated, "always so tough." Then he smiled like a man convinced he'd won. "Let's see how tough you are without water." They laughed as the truck turned. The dust swallowed them. And then silence. The kind of silence that has weight. She lay still for a count of 10, 15. Then she rolled onto her side and spat out grit. The sun hammered down, 116 degrees and climbing. Her wrists burned under the plastic tie. But she didn't fight it yet. She studied the shadows, the slope of the dunes, the way wind scoured the ground in one direction. Every inch of her training came alive. Fear wanted movement, training demanded stillness. She waited, counted breaths. The sound of engines faded. And for the first time in hours, she spoke, just a whisper into the empty air. "They think I'm alone." Her lips cracked, the taste of blood mixed with sand. "They're wrong." She turned her face toward the east, toward the compound, toward her captured team. Then, inch by inch, she began to move. Not fast, not loud, just steady. The desert would not show mercy, but it might, if she respected it, let her pass. And for Maya Torres, Staff Sergeant, Delta Force, Raven, that was enough. How long could the human body last when the world tried to erase it? That was the question beating behind her temples as the sun climbed higher, turning the Sonoran desert into a furnace. Maya Torres crouched in the thin shadow of a creosote bush, wrists still zip-tied, tongue sticking to the roof of her mouth. Every inhale felt like dragging sandpaper across her lungs. Every exhale tasted of copper and dust. She should have been dead already. That's what the lieutenant had intended. But the desert, like war, didn't always keep its promises. She tilted her head, studying the line of the mountains far east, ghost blue through the shimmer. Between her and them stretched miles of rippling heat. No cover, no water, no sound. Except the wind. It hissed through the scrub like a whisper in another language. A test. "Still here," she muttered under her breath. Her voice was hoarse, half gone. Then she rolled her shoulders and got to work. She inched her wrists against the ground, sawing the plastic tie against a jagged piece of quartz buried in the sand. Each drag stung. Sweat soaked the back of her shirt. Her pulse thudded behind her eyes. But panic was noise, and noise wasted energy. Her mind slipped into that steady hum Delta training had built: observe, adapt, endure. She remembered the cold Carolina woods of selection, the way instructors forced them to navigate at night with nothing but a compass and silence. "You'll want to scream," they told her. "Don't. The forest doesn't care. The desert won't either." Back then, she hadn't understood that the test wasn't about distance. It was about dignity. Now she did. The zip tie finally gave a hair-thin snap. Not freedom yet, but a start. She froze, listening. Nothing. The desert was vast and cruel, but it hid its cruelty in patience. She slid one wrist free and rubbed her skin until blood returned, hot and prickling. Then she pressed both hands into the sand and pushed herself upright. Her knees shook once, then steadied. She scanned the horizon, No movement, no dust trails. They thought she'd die in hours, she'd last days. And when she came back, she'd bring her people out. She crouched and began crawling east, staying low, using the dips in the land like handholds. Every 20 feet she paused, listening for engines. None yet. By mid-afternoon, the heat had a sound, a high, glassy ringing in her skull. The air above the sand rippled like boiling water. Her vision tunneled, her breath came ragged. She stopped under the faint shadow of a rock outcrop and pressed her palm to the ground. The sand beneath the top layer was cool, damp even, faintly. She dug with her fingers, scooping handfuls of grit until she hit dark, compact soil. She pressed it to her lips, bitter, metallic, moisture. She closed her eyes and let a single drop of it dissolve on her tongue. The relief wasn't enough to quench thirst, but it told her something important. The water table leaned south. That meant old runoff, maybe a dry creek bed ahead. She rose and adjusted her course. The sun slid down the sky, bleeding gold into red. Shadows stretched long. The first coyote calls carried faint across the flats. She walked until her legs trembled too much to lift. Then she dropped behind a rise and lay on her back, watching the stars appear one by one. It was strange, she thought, how quiet dying could look. But she wasn't dying, not yet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. The edges were frayed, the image almost erased by sweat. Her sister, Lena, graduation day, Tucson, cheap paper gown, desert flower in her hair. Maya traced the curve of her smile with a thumb. Still waiting for me to come home, huh? The wind answered with a soft sigh. She closed her eyes and imagined Lena sitting on their father's porch, sketchbook in her lap, watching the sunrise over the Catalina Mountains. The desert doesn't care how tough you think you are, their father had said once. It teaches you how to be. That memory steadied her more than water. Somewhere far behind, faint engines murmured, patrols. She slid into the hollow of a dry wash, pulling bits of brush over herself. 2 trucks crested the ridge, moving slow, headlights off, searching. She held her breath. Laughter drifted, the same careless tone as before. One of them played music on a phone speaker, tinny and distorted. The other sang along. They weren't hunting seriously. They thought she was already gone. Still, she watched the direction they came from. Their tracks would tell her where the compound lay and where not to go. When they were gone, she crawled out. The moon was a thin silver blade enough to see by. She followed the faint groove of a dry stream bed for an hour, then another. Each step was a negotiation with pain. At dawn, the cold bit harder than the heat ever could. Her wrists ached, her throat burned raw. But when the first stripe of light cut the horizon, she smiled. Because she was still moving. Because she'd outlived their schedule. She sat on a rock, watching the desert wake. Somewhere to the south, a dust plume rose maybe a mile away. She ducked behind a ridge. Through the haze, she saw 2 riders on dirt bikes sweep the flats, stopping near an old, burned-out pickup, the one they dumped her from. They dismounted, talking lazily, kicking sand. One climbed into the truck bed, rummaging through debris. Something metallic clattered, a radio. Her pulse ticked faster. They laughed, mounted up, and rode off again, the sound fading to nothing. When she was sure they were gone, she crawled toward the truck. The radio lay half buried in grit. Dented, antenna gone, casing cracked, but the power light still flickered red. She brushed off the sand and turned the dial. Static whispered back. She adjusted the frequency 1 notch at a time. Nothing. But she didn't need to speak to send a message. She picked up a shard of metal from the truck's fender and tapped twice on the casing, then 3 short taps on the bed, then 1 long scrape. Tap, 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 scrape. To an untrained ear, just wind playing with junk. To anyone who'd served in Delta, a pattern, alive, eastbound, tracking. She repeated it twice more, then waited. Miles away, maybe no one would hear. Maybe they would. It didn't matter. The act itself meant she was still part of something larger. That was survival, not breathing belonging. She built a shelter from the broken tailgate and a sheet of half-buried tarp. Under it, the temperature dropped just enough to think clearly again. She checked her wrists, swollen but functional. She tore a strip of the tarp and wrapped them tight. Then she turned her attention back to the compound, invisible beyond the dunes but etched perfectly in her mind. Hux was there, alive if his last look meant anything. She owed him more than hope. She needed a plan. The desert taught her patience. Delta had taught her precision. Together, they made something stronger than fear. She crouched in the wash and traced shapes into the sand, walls, gates, the location of the dog she'd seen tethered near the east fence. She mapped it before she was captured. Every corner, every gap. She whispered to herself as she worked. North wall broken, generator shed south side, patrol every 15. Her voice was a rasp, but hearing it kept her anchored. The night ahead would be her window. She would move when the wind turned, when the sound of the generator masked her steps. For now she rested, if you could call it that. Her body twitched with exhaustion, but her mind wouldn't sleep. She watched the horizon pulse faintly, not sunrise, not lightning, firelight from the compound. Men celebrating cruelty. She let the thought pass. Hate was heavy. Instead, she focused on breathing, counting heartbeats. Her father's voice again. When you think you're dying, count 4 things you can see, 3 you can touch, 2 you can smell, 1 you can control. She obeyed. She saw the moon, the sand, the broken truck, the faint ridge line. She touched the tarp, the radio, the shard of metal. She smelled oil and dust. And she controlled herself. That was enough. Hours slipped by. The wind changed direction, now west to east. Perfect. She rose, stretched aching limbs, and started walking toward the compound. Every few steps, she stopped to listen. Night birds, crickets, no engines. When she reached the first rise overlooking the walls, she lay flat. The compound glowed amber, a handful of bulbs under a corrugated roof. She could see figures moving, shadows arguing, one smoking near the gate. She counted their rhythm, 7 minutes per patrol cycle. She waited through 2, then moved on the 3rd. Crawling inch by inch, through the thorn brush until she reached the outer wall. Her heart thudded steady, slow. The guard near the east gate had drifted half asleep, rifle loose in his hands. She waited for the wind to gust, then slipped forward, silent as thought. He turned his head at the last second, catching movement, but only the shadow of a tarp fluttering. When she pressed her back to the wall, her fingers found a cracked seam in the brick. Perfect foothold. She climbed. The wall's top tore her palms, but she didn't stop. When her eyes cleared the edge, she froze. Below, under the tarp, she saw them, 2 prisoners, Hux and another man tied to a post. And there, packing like a bored god, the lieutenant. Vargas, still smiling. He was speaking to someone, an older man with a scar over his brow. They stood near a table cluttered with papers and an open laptop. The older man said something in Spanish. Vargas laughed. Then he pointed toward Hux. Maya's pulse turned to ice. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. The rhythm of interrogation never changed. Pain first, then the promise of mercy. She had to act, but not yet, not blind. Her gaze swept the courtyard, 1 light over the tarp, 2 guards by the generator shed, the dog tethered and asleep. Every detail filed, memorized, measured. She climbed back down without a sound. Tomorrow night she'd come again. And the next, until the odds shifted, until she could make the room forget fear and remember order. The desert didn't reward the strong, it rewarded the stubborn. And she was both. She crawled back into her shelter, and watched the horizon pale with dawn. For the first time since capture, she felt something like hope, small, fragile, but alive. She touched the raven tattoo behind her ear, its shape warm against her skin. "Not done yet," she whispered. Then she lay still as the sun rose, and the desert waited to see if she meant it. How close can courage get to fear before they become the same thing? That thought carried her through the long day that followed, as the sun clawed its way back over the dunes and burned everything soft from the land. Maya stayed low under her patchwork shelter, eyes half closed against the glare. Every few minutes she sipped air through her teeth, measuring her breathing like a metronome. The heat pressed down until the line between skin and sand disappeared. She used that stillness to think. Nightfall would give her a window, no more than 20 minutes when the patrol pattern slipped, when fatigue dulled the edge of vigilance. She would have to cross 200 meters of open ground, find the weak seam in the compound wall, and decide whether she was there to rescue or to witness. Both paths carried death, one just took longer. When the light finally bent orange, she rose slowly, testing her legs. They ached but obeyed. She checked her pockets, the folded photograph of Lena, the metal shard she'd sharpened against stone, a strip of wire torn from the truck's radio coil. Not much, but enough to build purpose out of nothing. She waited until the sky bruised purple, then she moved. The desert transformed at night. The air cooled, the wind whispered instead of roared. Every sound carried farther. Each step had to be an act of faith. She crept along the wash, using the darker sand as cover. Ahead, the compound lights glowed like a ship at sea. Voices drifted on the wind, men laughing, someone tuning a guitar badly, the bark of that restless dog near the east gate. Her pulse slowed, focus sharpened. Delta training called it switching bandwidths, turning the mind from noise to signal, fear to information. She felt each heartbeat as data, each breath as a tool. At the outer wall she crouched, hands finding the same seam she'd mapped before. The brick crumbled slightly under her fingers. She slipped the wire into the crack, twisting until it hooked around the inner rebar. A quick pull. The wire hummed but held. Perfect. She used it as leverage, climbing until her chin cleared the edge. Inside, the courtyard lay half in shadow. A tarp flapped gently above a table. The laptop from the night before still glowed, its blue light painting the lieutenant's face as he argued with the older interrogator. Maya's breath caught. Hux was still alive. Barely. Slumped against the same post, skin ashen, arm bound with stained cloth. Two other prisoners she hadn't seen before sat nearby, one wearing the remains of a U.S. contractor's uniform, another local, maybe a translator. 3 lives in her hands. And no weapon. She dropped silently back down. Not yet. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of diesel and sweat. The generator coughed twice, then steadied. Every sound etched itself into her map. She crept along the wall to the south side, where a section had cracked near the foundation. There, half buried under rubble, she found a rusted pipe jutting out, a drainage channel, big enough for a person if she crawled. She smiled faintly. The world built exits for those patient enough to look. She slid inside feet first, moving inch by inch. The metal scraped her boots. Each breath echoed loud in her ears. When she emerged, she was inside the outer perimeter. Voices were clearer now. The men joked about the Americans, about ransom, about power. She heard the lie beneath their laughter, the kind men tell each other to keep from hearing their own fear. She crouched behind a stack of crates and waited. A guard passed close, humming. His rifle hung loose. She could have taken him, one strike to the throat, one twist of the weapon, but she didn't. Violence was a currency best spent sparingly. Every unnecessary kill shouted louder than any alarm. Instead, she watched his path, memorized his timing, and slipped through the gap behind him. At the tarp's edge, she froze. Vargas stood 10 feet away, talking into a radio. His tone was strained, no longer cocky. Something in his posture had changed, the slouch of a man who suspects his certainty is cracking. "I don't care what you heard," he was saying in Spanish. "We have the prisoners, the woman is dead." He listened, jaw tightening. Static answered him. Maya almost laughed. The signal she'd sent, the tap pattern in the metal, had done its work. Doubt had reached them. She looked toward Hux again. His head lolled, but his chest moved. When the guard near him stepped away to smoke, she crawled forward, using the crates as cover. She reached him and pressed 2 fingers to his shoulder. His eyes fluttered open, glassy but aware. "Raven," he mouthed. She nodded once. "Breathe," she whispered, the same way she had in the firefight, not loud. He did. The smallest smile tugged his lips. She slipped the shard of metal from her pocket and began sawing at his wrist tie. The cord frayed slowly, fibers snapping one by one. Behind her, Vargas barked another order. "Double the patrols. I don't want ghosts in my desert." Ghosts? The word almost made her pause. When the last strand broke, she gripped Hux's hand briefly. "When I move, you follow the wall north. Wait for my signal. 3 taps, got it?" He nodded weakly. She faded back into the dark, heart hammering. At the far side of the courtyard, the older interrogator had sat down, scrolling through the laptop. Maya recognized the images, faces of captured operatives, lists of call signs. He lingered on one photo. Sorry. The shot was years old, taken on an airstrip in Afghanistan. Capped low, eyes shadowed. On the brim, the word Raven. The man froze, staring. Then he whispered something to Vargas. The laughter stopped. Maya saw it ripple through the group, the shift from arrogance to unease. The name meant something, even here. Stories traveled faster than borders. The interrogator tapped the photo with one finger. "I know this one," he murmured. "They say she walks out of places no one walks out of." Vargas scoffed, but his eyes flicked toward the wall. "Stories," he said too quickly. "We killed her." The older man didn't answer. Maya stayed still, barely breathing. Let them talk. Let the myth do its work. A light breeze passed over the yard, stirring the tarp. The dog near the gate lifted its head, ears pricked, then lay back down. Even the animals could feel tension. When Vargas finally left for the office, the others drifted away. Maya waited 5 full minutes before moving again. She crawled back to Hux. His pulse beat stronger now. Hope was a drug the body knew how to metabolize. She whispered, "Tonight we leave." He nodded, disbelief and faith warring in his face. She moved next to the contractor, cutting his bindings. The man blinked at her, tears mixing with dirt. "Quiet," she mouthed. He obeyed. By the time the sky began to pale, she had them positioned near the drainage pipe. One more trip inside and they could be gone. But something stopped her, a sound. Tap, 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 tap. She froze. It came from the far wall, metal on metal. Not random, hold position. Her breath caught. Someone else was alive in there, someone trained. Maybe Delta, maybe not. Either way, she wasn't alone anymore. She turned back to the men, held up a hand. "Wait." She crawled toward the sound's origin, staying low under the tarp. Near the generator shed, a shadow moved, another prisoner, bound but conscious, tapping his cuff against the pipe. His eyes met hers. Recognition flickered there. He mouthed a single word, "Medic." She nodded once, sliced his bindings with the shard, and pointed toward the escape path. He hesitated, then touched her wrist quick, grateful, and crawled away. When she turned back, dawn had painted the horizon silver. Too late to move now. She retreated to the shadow behind the crates and waited for daylight to hide her among its blindness. At sunrise, Vargas returned. His smile was thinner. The older interrogator avoided his gaze. The men were quieter now, Every rumor had become a question. Maya studied their faces. She saw the first fractures of conscience, small but real. That was how you turned enemies, not with force, with memory. She closed her eyes briefly. Somewhere beyond those walls, she knew the rescue birds were listening. The faint pulse of her signal would reach someone. But even if they didn't come, she'd finish this her way. At noon, the heat returned, blinding and absolute. The men retreated to shade. She waited until the hum of the generator masked her steps again. Then she whispered to Hux, "Ready." He gave a small nod. She tapped the pipe 3 times. The medic and the contractor crawled first, disappearing into the darkness. Hux followed, one arm clutched to his chest. When he vanished, Maya stayed behind. There was something she had to see. The moment when Vargas realized control had slipped through his fingers. It came faster than she expected. A guard shouted. Another ran toward the empty post. Vargas stormed from his office, pistol drawn, barking orders. "They're gone," someone yelled. Vargas spun in a circle, rage and fear twisting his features. "Find them, all of them." He pointed at the gate. "Search the dunes." The men scattered. And in that chaos, Maya stepped into the courtyard, silent, unarmed, wrapped in shadow. For the first time, she felt no fear, only clarity. She watched Vargas shout into the void, watched his confidence collapse under the weight of reality. He'd left her to die in the desert. Now the desert was coming for him, wearing her face. She didn't move yet. Timing mattered. When the last truck roared out, she took one step forward, letting the light catch the small raven tattoo behind her ear. Somewhere deep inside, something ancient shifted, the quiet acknowledgement of survival earned, not given. The desert didn't forgive, but it respected those who refused to bow. Maya crouched, picked up the dropped radio from the table and keyed it once. Static, then faintly a human voice. "Repeat signal confirmed. Team inbound, ETA 20. She closed her eyes. Relief and focus blended into one steady breath. The cavalry was coming. But before they arrived, she had a message to deliver, not with bullets but with presence. She looked toward the compound gate, where the dust from Vargas's truck still hung like smoke. "Lesson 1," she whispered, "never underestimate silence." Then she stepped into the light, ready to make them remember it. When does justice end and vengeance begin? That question pressed in as Maya stood alone in the courtyard, the last echo of truck engines fading into the desert wind. Dust hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't yet started. The compound was half empty now, just her, the hum of the generator, and a few frightened men who hadn't run fast enough. She walked forward, slow, steady, no weapon in her hands. One of the guards spotted her first. His cigarette dropped from his mouth. "Dios mío," he whispered, stepping back as if seeing a ghost. Maybe he was. Maya's face was cut and sunburned, her eyes bloodshot from sand and sleeplessness, her clothes streaked with dust. But she moved like someone who had made peace with pain. There was no anger in her, just purpose. The guard lifted his rifle. His hands shook. "Don't," she said quietly. Something in her tone, low, calm, absolute, stopped him. She crossed the courtyard until she stood beneath the tarp. The laptop still glowed with her photograph, that old grainy image with the word Raven across her cap. She closed it gently. The sound of it clicking shut was louder than any gunshot. "Where Vargas?" she asked in Spanish. The guard swallowed. "Gone, took trucks east to find." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. "Then you run," she said. He hesitated, as if unsure whether it was mercy or a trick. "I said run." He did. The others followed too, 3 scrambling for the back gate, vanishing into the heat haze. And just like that, the noise was gone. She stood alone again, dust swirling around her boots. She keyed the radio once more. "Echo team, this is Raven. Do you copy?" Static, then a voice, faint but real. Raven, we read you. Visual confirmed from drone feed. Sit tight, 20 mics. She exhaled slowly. 20 minutes, long enough for ghosts to settle their debts. She crossed to the shade of the generator shed, crouched beside the wall, and waited. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from the sudden realization that she'd survived longer than she expected to. Her mind drifted, uninvited, to Lena. You always go where no one asks you to go, her sister once told her. You find trouble like it owes you something. Maybe she did. But it wasn't about trouble, it was about unfinished things. The sound of an approaching engine cut through her thoughts, single vehicle, small, moving fast. Not Delta. She pressed herself against the wall, eyes narrowing. Through the shimmer, a pickup appeared, the same one Vargas had driven. He was coming back, alone. The truck skidded to a stop in the yard, dust curling around the tires. Vargas jumped out, pistol drawn, face slick with sweat. He saw her instantly. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other, predator and prey switching masks. Then he laughed, sharp and disbelieving. Impossible, he said. I left you to die. You did, she answered. He raised his pistol. Then what are you? She stepped closer, a reminder. He fired. The bullet shattered a crate beside her, wood splinters biting her arm. She dove behind the table, grabbed the laptop and flung it aside. Another shot tore through the tarp. She waited for the pause, the half-second where ego outruns aim. Then she moved. She hit him low, driving her shoulder into his ribs. The pistol flew from his hand, clattering across the ground. They went down hard. Sand filled her mouth. He swung, caught her jaw, tried to pin her. She kneed him once in the side, rolled, came up on top. He grabbed for her throat. She caught his wrist, twisted, felt the joint crack. He screamed. She didn't. They froze like that, his hand trapped, his eyes wild. You think this makes you strong, he spat. You're the same as me. She stared down at him, breath ragged. No, she said quietly. I remember what I stand for. He tried to laugh, but it broke halfway out. You'll kill me anyway. She hesitated. The world narrowed to two faces, two histories, one moment balanced on a knife edge. Killing him would be easy, quick, maybe even deserved. But her father's voice echoed again, the lesson that had carried her through every fight. Dignity doesn't speak, it acts. She released his wrist. He stared, stunned. She stood, kicked his pistol far away, and stepped back. You'll answer for what you did, she said, but not to me. He looked up, confused. Then to who? The sky answered for her, a deep, growing rumble that shook the air. Vargas turned, eyes widening. Over the dunes, black shapes cut across the horizon, helicopters, low and fast. Delta. Maya's knees almost buckled with relief. Dust whipped through the yard as the first bird hovered overhead, rotor wash flattening everything that wasn't nailed down. Vargas shielded his face, shouting something she couldn't hear. Maya just stood there, hair whipping around her, eyes closed, feeling the weight lift. A voice boomed through the comms. Raven, stay clear, team inbound. Two operators fast-roped down, rifles sweeping. One spotted her, tapped his helmet. Target secured, friendly on deck. She raised her hand slightly, wordless. They fanned out, securing the perimeter, cuffing Vargas without ceremony. When he tried to protest, one of them silenced him with a single sentence. You're alive because she decided you should be. Maya looked away. The team medic knelt beside her. Ma'am, we've got Hux and two others evac ready. You did good, sit tight. She nodded, but her gaze drifted past him, out toward the endless horizon. The desert looked different now, not kinder but understood. As the helicopter settled lower, the medic helped her aboard. Hux lay on a stretcher inside, pale but breathing. When he saw her, his mouth twitched into a faint smile. Thought you were a ghost, he croaked. Maybe I was, she said softly. Didn't feel like flesh for a while. He laughed weakly, then closed his eyes. She sat beside him, hands trembling again. Not from adrenaline this time, from release. Outside, the compound shrank until it was just another scar on the earth. Vargas knelt in the dirt below, bound, shouting into the wind. His words vanished before they reached her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The pilot's voice came over the intercom. Raven, command wants you debriefed ASAP. You're one hell of a story. She looked out the window at the expanse of gold and bone below. No, she murmured, just one of many. He didn't hear her, maybe no one did. The flight back was long and quiet. The men around her stayed focused, respectful. Soldiers knew when silence mattered more than words. Maya watched the dunes pass beneath them, each one shaped by wind and time, proof that endurance leaves its mark, even if no one notices. When they landed at the forward base, the heat hit her again, but this time it smelled like home. Diesel, dust, and the faint trace of survival. The debrief tent waited, sterile and white. A colonel she didn't know met her with a practiced smile. "Sergeant Torres," he said, "we thought we lost you." "Not yet," she answered. He gestured to a chair. "You recovered 3 personnel, that's remarkable." She didn't sit. "They're alive." "Stable," he said. "Evac, already en route to Germany." She nodded once. That was enough. The colonel studied her for a moment. "You understand this operation never officially happened." She almost smiled. "None of them ever do." He opened a file. "Still, command wanted me to tell you something." She waited. He looked up. "They said, 'Well done, Raven.'" For a long moment she said nothing. Then, "Don't thank me, thank the desert." He frowned, not understanding, but that was fine. Later in the makeshift barracks, she finally let herself lie down. The cot creaked, the canvas rough against her skin. She stared at the ceiling, the noise of distant generators humming like a lullaby. Sleep didn't come easily. Memories flickered, the smoke, the laughter, the silence. Vargas's face when he realized mercy was worse than death. Some lessons needed to be felt, not taught. When she did drift off, it wasn't to dreams, but to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, slow, even, present. Morning came early. She woke before the sun, habit refusing to break. Outside, the desert stretched endless and golden. She stood there barefoot, cool sand under her toes, the air still and sharp. The rescue teams had gone. The world had already moved on. She picked up her pack, lighter now, stripped of everything unnecessary, and walked to the perimeter fence. No ceremony, no audience, just the quiet truth of continuation. The sun climbed. She squinted against it, eyes watering. She thought of Lena again, her laughter, her gentleness, the kind of strength that didn't need a weapon. Maybe she'd go home, maybe she wouldn't. But she'd learned something the desert had been trying to tell her all along. Survival wasn't about outlasting death. It was about honoring life. She whispered the words under her breath, almost a prayer. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The wind carried it away. Behind her, a voice called out the medic from the flight. "Raven, you heading somewhere?" She turned, smiling faintly. "Just walking," she said. "The desert not done teaching me yet." He grinned. "Guess some people never rest." "Rest is overrated," she said, and started toward the horizon. The camera would have followed her from behind, small figure against a vast sea of gold, until she disappeared into the shimmer. And somewhere faintly, the sound of rotors returned, blending with the wind. What happens after you survive the impossible? No one tells you that the hardest part isn't dying, it's returning. Maya Torres learned that somewhere between the roar of the helicopter and the hush of the hospital ward, when the noise of war faded and all that was left was breath. For the first time in days, she woke to air that smelled clean, sterile sheets, the faint beep of monitors, the hum of refrigeration somewhere beyond the wall. She blinked up at the ceiling and almost didn't recognize the feeling that came with consciousness. Safety. It should have been relief, but it felt like weight. She tried to sit, pain lanced through her ribs. The nurse rushed over, gentle, efficient. Easy, Sergeant, you're at Landstuhl, you've been here 3 days. 3 days. She'd lost entire seasons before, this felt like a blink. Her throat was raw, my team. The nurse smiled softly. Alive, the tech, Corporal Huxley, he's stable. He's been asking about you. Maya exhaled, half laugh, half tremor. He made it. He made it because of you, the nurse said, adjusting her IV. Maya looked away. Compliments were heavier than bullets, at least bullets you could deflect. When the nurse left, she sat still, staring at her hands. They were trembling, though not from weakness. She flexed them slowly, as if confirming they were still hers. The window beside her showed the overcast German sky, pale, clean, nothing like the Sonoran furnace. It should have felt foreign, but it didn't. It just felt empty. She heard the door open quietly. Permission to enter. The voice was familiar, calm, precise. Colonel Adams, she said without looking. He stepped in, holding a small envelope. His uniform was perfect, boots polished. Everything about him looked composed. That made her tired just to see it. You gave us quite a scare, he said. I'm still here. That's an understatement. He sat on the chair across from her bed, elbows on his knees. I read your report, twice. She didn't answer. He sighed. You saved 4 people, neutralized an enemy compound, and captured a high-value lieutenant. You also walked 72 kilometers through hostile terrain with no gear. That's... She cut him off. Luck. Don't insult yourself. I'm not, she said quietly. I'm just telling the truth. He studied her face. You think surviving was an accident. I think surviving was necessary. He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than he was allowed to say. Command wants you stateside for debrief and leave, but if you want a desk, they'll give you one. She almost smiled. A desk, you'd cage a raven. Sometimes cages keep you safe. She shook her head. No, they just keep you still. He stood. Then what do you want? She looked at the window again. Clouds drifted like slow ships, to feel human again. He hesitated, then set the envelope on her tray. This came through diplomatic channels. Mexican army intercepted it from Vargas's group. She frowned. What is it? He tapped it once. A letter addressed to you. When he left, the room felt smaller. She stared at the envelope for a long time before tearing it open. Inside was a single page, written in uneven English. To the woman called Raven. You could have killed me, you did not. The men you spared told me you looked at me like you saw through me. I don't understand why. I thought mercy was weakness. Maybe it is strength. I will think about that until my trial. V. She read it twice, then set it down. For a moment she just sat there, eyes burning. Mercy. Her father's words echoed again. The real test isn't how you fight, it's how you stop fighting. She reached for the photograph on her bedside table, the one of Lena. It had been cleaned, the edges flattened. The nurse must have found it in her gear. Still here, she whispered. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the desert again, the shimmer, the smoke, the slow crawl through endless heat. But this time there was no fear in it, only understanding. The desert hadn't tried to kill her. It had stripped her down to truth. At dawn, she pulled out her IV, ignored the nurse's protests, and walked, barefoot, hospital gown swaying, out into the cold morning air. The courtyard smelled of wet earth and jet fuel. Somewhere above, a transport plane lifted off, the sound fading into distance. She closed her eyes and let the chill settle into her bones. For the first time, she felt the weight of what she'd been carrying. Not guilt, not pride, something quieter. responsibility. Survival meant she now had to live with what she'd survived. When they finally cleared her to travel, she returned to the States under the cover of anonymity. No cameras, no parades, just a duffel bag and silence. Tucson was as she remembered: sun-baked streets, slow wind, the smell of mesquite and oil. The house she'd grown up in sat on the edge of the desert, shutters half open, paint faded. Lena was there, waiting on the porch. For a second, Maya froze. Her sister's face hadn't changed much, same wide eyes, same unguarded warmth. But when she saw Maya, her expression broke into something rawer than joy. "Maya," she whispered, stepping forward. Maya didn't know what to do with her hands. For years, she'd lived by rules: clear, sharp, useful. But there was no protocol for homecoming. Lena solved it by simply wrapping her arms around her, tight, wordless. For a moment, Maya forgot how to breathe. Then she did, and it hurt in the best way. When they finally pulled apart, Lena looked her over, eyes glassy. "You look smaller." Maybe the desert took what it didn't need. Lena smiled through tears. "Dad would have said that." "Yeah," Maya said softly, "he probably would have." Inside, the house smelled of old wood and coffee. Dust motes drifted through slanted light. It hadn't changed, except for one thing. On the living room wall hung her father's Ranger tab, framed beside a small quote he'd written years ago. "Courage isn't noise, it's direction." Maya stood there a long time, reading it again and again. That evening she sat on the porch while Lena made dinner. The sun dipped low, washing the desert in copper and rose. Somewhere far off, coyotes called. She could have stayed like that forever. But peace, she knew, wasn't a destination, it was maintenance. Lena came out with 2 cups of coffee. "You planning on sleeping anytime soon?" "Maybe later." "You could stay a while. There's work at the airfield," civilian sighed. Maya nodded absently. "Maybe." But they both knew she wouldn't. There were still people out there, people like Vargas, and others who hadn't yet learned what mercy meant. And there were teams still walking into deserts of their own. Lena reached over, touching her hand. "You don't always have to save everyone you know." "I know. So why do you keep trying?" Maya looked out across the fading horizon. "Because someone has to remember what we're capable of, the good parts." Lena smiled softly. "You sound like Dad again." Maybe he finally got through. They sat in silence as the stars came out, one by one. Later, when Lena went inside, Maya stayed. The night air carried a faint chill, the kind that reminded her of helicopter rotors and faraway call signs. She reached into her pocket and unfolded Vargas's letter again. The paper fluttered in the breeze. Mercy. She wasn't sure if it had changed him, but it had changed her. She pulled a pen from her jacket, turned the paper over, and wrote 4 words on the back. It wasn't weakness, choice. Then she folded it, placed it under the old Ranger tab inside the house, and whispered, "That's for you, Dad." When dawn came, she packed light: just her watch, her dog tags, and the desert's memory. Lena woke as she was heading to the truck. "Where will you go?" Maya smiled faintly. "Where I'm needed." "Do you even know where that is?" She glanced at the horizon. "Not yet, but the road will tell me." Lena hugged her one last time. "Then promise me something. When you find peace, don't walk past it." "I'll try." She climbed into the truck, engine rumbling softly. As she drove away, the desert opened before her, endless, honest. The sky turned gold, then white. She felt the same calm she'd felt in the moment she chose not to pull the trigger. A peace earned, not granted. Because survival wasn't the reward, living with grace was. Her voice, if it had been a narration, would have sounded like wind across stone. In war, they teach you how to fight. The desert teaches you how to stop. And somewhere between the two, you find yourself. She smiled, eyes on the horizon. The raven tattoo behind her ear caught the sunlight, black, defiant, alive. And as the screen would fade to white, her voice would linger one last time. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. What do you do when the fight inside you refuses to end, even after the war does? That was the question Maya asked herself most mornings, long after the desert, long after the rescue, long after the headlines had forgotten her name. Months had passed since she'd driven away from Tucson. Time hadn't healed anything. It had only rearranged the pain into quieter shapes. She'd settled where no one would think to look, a small Army airfield on the edge of Nevada. Officially, she was a consultant, whatever that meant. In truth, she was a ghost that taught others how not to become one. The airfield wasn't much, 2 hangars, a cracked runway, a handful of recruits too young to understand what they were asking of themselves. They called her ma'am at first. After a week, they learned to call her Raven. The name carried weight here, though most didn't know why. Every morning before sunrise, she ran drills with them. Weapon checks, navigation under stress, land navigation through the scrub hills. But what she really taught had nothing to do with tactics. Anyone can pull a trigger, she told them, but it takes control not to. They'd look at her confused. She'd smile faintly and move on. Some lessons had to be lived before they made sense. Her favorite student was a young woman named Tessa Ward, 23, eager, stubborn, eyes full of something too close to hope. Tessa reminded Maya of herself, before the desert had burned away the noise. One evening after drills, Tessa approached her. The sun was sinking, turning the tarmac gold. "Ma'am," she said hesitantly, "can I ask something personal?" Maya wiped her hands on a towel. "If it's about shooting, save it for tomorrow. If it's about life, I might have an answer." Tessa hesitated. "How do you know when it's over?" "When what's over?" "The mission, the guilt, the part of you that doesn't stop running." Maya looked at her for a long moment. The wind lifted the edge of her hair. "You don't. You just learn to walk beside it." Tessa frowned. "That sounds hard." "It's supposed to be." Tessa nodded slowly, not understanding yet, but she would. After she left, Maya stood alone on the runway, watching the sky darken. The same stars she'd watched from the desert flickered overhead, sharp and distant. She thought about Vargas's letter again, folded inside her field journal. The words had grown heavier, not lighter. "Maybe mercy is strength." She didn't know if he believed it yet, but she wanted to. A month later, she got the call. A training team in Utah had gone missing during a desert exercise, bad weather, lost comms. No one was dead, not yet, but the area was rough and remote. They needed someone who knew what it meant to survive out there. She didn't even hesitate. By nightfall, she was in a Black Hawk headed north, Tessa at her side. "Looks familiar," Tessa asked over the noise of the rotors. Maya looked out at the dark ridges below, the vast emptiness beyond. All deserts are family, some just hide their teeth better. When they landed, the wind was cold, thin, merciless. The search team briefed them quickly. 2 recruits unaccounted for, last GPS ping near an old mining site. Tessa adjusted her pack. "You think they're alive?" Maya looked at the map, tracing the ridgelines. If they remembered their training, yes. She didn't say what she was really thinking. That survival wasn't just about training. It was about choosing to believe you deserve to live. They moved out before dawn. The cold bit hard at first light. Maya led, eyes scanning for tracks. The desert here was different, pale limestone instead of red sand, sagebrush instead of cacti. But the silence was the same. By midday, they found the first sign, a torn piece of fabric caught on a rock, marked with Army insignia. Tessa crouched beside it. "At least we know they made it this far." "Or stopped here," Maya said quietly. They followed the trail another mile before they found them, huddled in the shadow of an outcrop, exhausted but alive. When one of the recruits saw Maya, he blinked in disbelief. You're her." Maya smiled faintly. No, I'm just someone who learned to listen to the desert. They got the boys stabilized, radioed the evac, and waited for extraction. As the helicopter approached, Tessa looked at Maya. You could have stayed at the base. Why come out here? Maya didn't answer right away. She watched the horizon, the same way she always did before leaving a place. Because someone has to teach the desert that it doesn't get the last word. Tessa smiled, and did it listen? Maya looked at the recruits, bruised, shivering, alive. It did tonight. Back at the airfield, Command tried to debrief her again, to write another line in another report. She gave them what they wanted, the times, the locations, but not the truth. The truth didn't fit into forms. That night she sat alone in the hangar, cleaning her rifle she no longer needed. The lights buzzed overhead. The world felt too still. Tessa appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. Couldn't sleep either, Maya asked. Tessa shook her head. No, too much adrenaline. They sat on the floor beside each other, the way soldiers do when chairs feel like too much ceremony. After a while, Tessa said, You ever regret coming back? Maya thought about it. Sometimes, but not for the reasons you think. What reasons then? Because living means remembering, and remembering means reliving. Tessa nodded slowly. You think it ever gets easier? Maya looked at her, really looked, and saw the same hunger she used to have. No, she said softly, but you get stronger, and one day you realize strength isn't about armor. It's about carrying the weight and still choosing kindness. They sat in silence for a long time. When the first light of dawn crept through the hangar windows, Maya stood, stretching stiff muscles. Come on, she said. Time to run. Tessa groaned, now. The world doesn't wait. As they jogged out across the runway, the rising sun turned the asphalt to gold. Dust swirled around their boots. Maya felt something loosen inside her chest. Not joy exactly, but a kind of peace that came from movement, from being useful again. For the first time since the desert, she wasn't running from something. She was running toward it. Days turned into weeks. The training program grew. Word spread quietly that there was a woman at the edge of the desert who taught soldiers how to survive not just the heat, but themselves. Some called her a legend, others called her a ghost. Maya called herself neither. She was just a soldier still learning how to live. One afternoon, a young journalist showed up, credentials trembling in his hands. They say you're Delta, he said, nervous. The one who? She cut him off gently. Whatever you heard, forget it. But people could learn from your story. They already are, she said. Out there. She nodded toward the training field where Tessa was leading a drill, shouting commands that carried across the wind. The journalist followed her gaze, then looked back at her. You're not going to tell me anything, are you? Maya smiled. Stories don't belong to the teller, they belong to those who need them. He left disappointed, but maybe wiser. That evening, Maya sat alone again, writing in her journal not reports, not records, just fragments. Lessons the desert had carved into her. Pain isn't the enemy, fear of it is. Mercy is not surrender. Silence is its own language, use it well. She paused, pen hovering, then wrote one more. Teach what almost killed you, it might save someone else. She closed the book, exhaled slowly, and let the wind through the open hangar door wash over her. Outside, the desert stretched endless, indifferent and strangely beautiful. She smiled faintly. The desert hadn't taken her, it had refined her. And as the stars came out, same ones that had watched her crawl, bleed, and endure, she whispered to herself, not as a soldier, but as a student who'd finally understood her teacher. The desert doesn't teach survival, it teaches meaning. The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back slowly, the hangar lights glowing in the vast dark, a single figure sitting still, finally at peace with silence. And her voice, soft and steady, would have closed the scene. We're not defined by what breaks us. We're defined by what we build after. And sometimes that's quieter than anyone expects. How long can peace last before the world reminds you it was only on loan? For Maya Tours, it lasted 2 years. 2 years of desert dawns that smelled of jet fuel and sagebrush. 2 years of teaching recruits how to breathe through fear instead of fight it. 2 years of quiet. She begun to believe she might keep it. Until the letter came. It arrived the same way Vargas's had no return address, just her name typed clean across the envelope. She found it sitting on the corner of her desk after morning drills, the paper faintly dusted with sand. She didn't open it right away. Her hand stayed on the edges for a long moment, the way you hold something that already knows too much about you. When she did tear it open, 3 photographs slipped out. The first, a prison yard somewhere in Mexico. Vargas, older, thinner, sitting on a bench, eyes turned toward the camera. The second, an empty cell. The third, a body under a sheet. The tag on the ankle read simply "Unknown Male, expired during transfer." There was one line typed at the bottom. Mercy echoes, V. Maya stared at it until the words blurred. She wasn't sure what the letter meant, confession, warning, or a strange kind of farewell. But it stirred something in her she hadn't felt in years, the faint vibration of unfinished business. That night she stood outside the hangar, watching a storm build over the hills. Lightning flickered behind the clouds, silent, contained. Tessa found her there. "You okay?" Maya handed her the letter. Tessa read it twice, brow furrowed. "You think he's dead?" "Maybe," Maya said, "maybe not." "Does it matter?" Maya's jaw tightened. "It shouldn't." But it did. Because mercy wasn't a single act. It was a thread you carried with you, and sometimes it wrapped tighter than you expected. 2 days later, command called. A smuggling network had collapsed near the same border region where she'd been left to die. They wanted her insight, not to fight, just to advise. She told them she was done. That night she didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, hearing the wind against the hangar walls, the steady breath of the desert beyond. By morning her bag was packed. Tessa intercepted her near the truck. "You're really going back?" Maya paused. "I'm not going back, I'm finishing something." "Need backup." Maya smiled faintly. "You're good, Ward, stay that way." Tessa's voice softened. "You once told me mercy was strength." "It still is." "Then show me what that looks like." Maya didn't answer. She just handed her a folded page from her journal, the one that read "Teach what almost killed you." Then she got in the truck and drove east. The borderlands hadn't changed. Same dust, same heat, same silence that hid everything worth knowing. She passed through checkpoints without trouble, a civilian now, forgotten by most of the world. At a gas station near Nogales, she asked about the prison listed in the photo. The attendant just shrugged. "Burned last year. Riot. Few made it out." "Any survivors?" He shook his head. "Maybe one, old guy with a scar." Her pulse slowed. Scar. The interrogator. The one who'd whispered her name before Vargas had laughed. She thanked him and left. The road wound south, empty and endless. By dusk, the mountains bled into the horizon, and the sky turned the same color as memory, gold fading to rust. She camped by an old well, built a small fire, and sat watching it flicker. In the flames, she saw faces. Hux's strained grin, Lena's gentle eyes, Vargas's smirk, her father's silence. They weren't ghosts, just mirrors. At dawn she found the remains of the prison. Blackened walls, collapsed roofs, birds nesting in the rafters. She walked the perimeter slowly. The air smelled of ash and salt. Near the north wall, she found a single inscription carved into the soot-stained concrete. 4 words, crude but deliberate. "Mercy makes men remember." Her throat tightened. Maybe Vargas had written it before dying. Maybe the interrogator had, or some other nameless soul who'd heard of her choice and lived long enough to think about it. Either way, the message was the same, a circle closing. She stood there for a long time, hand pressed to the wall. The desert wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of distant engines. She turned, scanning the horizon. 2 trucks, armed men. Instinct took over. She dropped low, slipped behind the rubble. The convoy stopped where her footprints ended. 3 men climbed out, scanning the ruins. One of them, tall, gray-bearded, shouted in Spanish, "We know who you are, Raven, the one who let Vargas live. You made him believe in things that got him killed." His words cut through the stillness. "You think mercy changes wolves," he sneered. "You made him weak. Now his blood is on your hands." She stayed silent. He fired a shot into the air. "Come out." Dust rained from the walls. Maya took a slow breath. Her heart didn't race this time. It simply moved with purpose. When she stepped out, her hands were empty. "I'm here," she said. The men tensed. The graybeard smirked. "Thought you were a myth." "Most myths start with mistakes." He raised his rifle. "This one ends with one." She didn't flinch. "You think killing me will make you strong. Mercy didn't kill Vargas. Cowardice did. He tried to change and you couldn't stand to see it." His eyes flickered just enough. Then headlights split the horizon. Another convoy, unmarked, moving fast. The graybeard turned, shouting orders. By the time he looked back, she was gone. The trucks arrived in seconds, tactical vehicles, U.S. insignia faint under the dust. Tessa jumped out of the lead one, helmet under her arm. "Couldn't let you ghost me again," she shouted over the engines. Maya almost laughed. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you." The graybeard's men panicked, firing wild. The desert lit up with muzzle flash and sand. Tessa ducked behind a rock, shouting, "What's the call, Raven?" Maya looked at the chaos, the dust, the noise, the echo of an old war repeating itself. And for the first time, she knew the answer. "No one dies today," she said. She stepped out, calm, commanding, "Cease fire." The shout cut through everything. It wasn't volume, it was certainty. Her team obeyed. The gunmen hesitated, confused by the silence. She walked forward, slow and unarmed, hands raised. "Enough," she said. "The man you followed is gone. What you're doing now, it's just noise." The graybeard aimed at her chest. "You think we'll just walk away?" "No," she said softly. "But maybe you'll remember this moment the next time someone offers you a choice." For a long heartbeat, nothing moved. Then one of his men lowered his weapon. Another followed. The leader cursed, threw his rifle to the ground, and stormed toward a truck. "You'll regret this," he spat. "Maybe," she said, "but not tonight." When the dust settled, Tessa walked up beside her, shaking her head. "You really don't like the easy way, do you?" Maya smiled faintly. "The easy way never lasts." They stood there as the wind erased the fresh tire tracks. "You could have taken him," Tessa said quietly. "I could have," Maya replied, "but the desert had enough blood." Tessa looked at her, eyes searching. "So what now?" Maya looked at the ruined prison, the horizon beyond it, the storm clouds breaking apart into light. "Now," she said, "we go home." They rode in silence, the sound of the engine blending with the wind. As they crossed back into familiar ground, Tessa glanced over. "You think he was right, that mercy makes people weak?" Maya shook her head. "No, it gives them a chance to be better. Whether they take it or not, that's their story." Tessa smiled. "And yours?" Maya looked out the window, the desert reflecting in her eyes. "Mine's still being written." When they reached the base, the sun was rising again, that same relentless golden light. She stepped out of the truck, stretching, feeling the weight finally lift from her shoulders. Tessa joined her. "You ever get tired of deserts?" "Every day," Maya said, "and yet I keep coming back." "Why?" Because it's honest. It takes everything lies, ego, fear, and burns it away until all that's left is who you really are. Tessa nodded. And who are you now? Maya smiled, faint and genuine. Someone who finally understands why my father called pain a teacher. The wind picked up again, warm and familiar. She turned toward it, letting her eyes close. Her voice, soft as dusk, would have been the narrator's final line for that scene. Mercy doesn't erase the past. It redeems the future. And sometimes, redemption looks a lot like starting over. The camera would pull back, two figures standing small against an endless horizon, the desert shimmering between shadow and light. Somewhere faintly, a raven called. And for the first time, its cry didn't sound like loneliness. It sounded like return. What does it mean to come home when home is no longer a place, but a state of peace you carry with you? For Maya Torres, it took years to learn that answer and a lifetime to accept it. Weeks passed since the border incident. The reports were written, the footage sealed, the names redacted. Officially, nothing had happened. Unofficially, something had shifted. In the small training base outside Fallen, the recruits whispered stories again. About a woman who could track ghosts through storms. About a soldier who once walked out of a desert with nothing but grit and mercy. They called her Raven still, but the tone had changed. It wasn't legend anymore, it was gratitude. Maya never corrected them. She stopped needing the world to understand. Some nights she still woke before dawn, the old habits intact, scanning the dark, listening for sounds that weren't there. But instead of reaching for a weapon, she reached for her journal. It had become her ritual, words instead of war. Each page carried pieces of what she'd learned the hard way, fragments of survival turned into lessons. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. The loudest courage is often the quietest moment of restraint. When you stop chasing peace, it finds you. She didn't write for command. She wrote for the ones who'd come after, soldiers who'd never meet her but might one day read her words and feel less alone. That was her new mission. Teaching, not fighting. Tessa had taken over the field program officially now, promoted, confident, loud in all the right ways. Maya watched her from the hangar window one morning, shouting instructions to the recruits as dust rose behind them. Pride wasn't something Maya felt often. It was too close to ego. But this was different. This was relief, seeing proof that the lessons hadn't died with the pain. Tessa spotted her watching and waved. "You joining us, old-timer?" Maya grinned. "Not today." "Come on, the desert misses you." "Let it." Tessa laughed, then turned back to her team. Maya leaned against the doorframe, the morning light cutting across her face. The desert didn't own her anymore. It just walked beside her now, a silent companion that had stopped testing and started teaching. Later that week, she received a visitor. A young man in civilian clothes, polite but nervous, carrying a military ID that looked too new. "You're Sergeant Torres?" he asked. "I was," she said. "Now I'm just Maya." He nodded, hesitating. "My father, he served with Delta years ago, said if I ever lost direction I should find you." "What's your name?" "Daniel Vargas." The world tilted just slightly. She studied his face. Same eyes but softer. No arrogance, no defiance, just a quiet searching. He must have seen the recognition in her expression because he spoke first. "He told me about you before the transfer." Maya said nothing. The air between them felt heavy but not hostile. "He said you spared him," Daniel continued. "He said it made him question everything. He wanted to thank you." Maya's throat tightened. "He did." The young man frowned. "When?" "After he died, I got his letter." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. "Then you know, he wasn't the same at the end. I think he wanted to believe people could change." Maya looked past him at the dunes. "Maybe we all do." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. He wanted me to give you this if I ever found you. She took it carefully. Inside was a single photograph, the prison wall where she'd found the words carved in soot. On the back, written in the same uneven handwriting, "Mercy outlives men." She traced the letters with her thumb, her eyes blurring. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel gave a small nod. He wasn't proud of what he did, but he said you taught him that forgiveness doesn't have to be mutual to matter. Maya folded the photo and slipped it into her journal. "Your father was a complicated man." Daniel almost smiled. "Guess that runs in the family." They stood in silence for a moment. The son of the man who once tried to break her, and the woman who'd refused to let vengeance define her. Then Maya extended her hand. "You ever need a compass, you know where to find me." He shook it firmly. "My father said the same thing once, but I think you mean it." She smiled faintly. "Yeah, I do." After he left, she sat in the hangar for a long time, watching the light shift across the floor. Life had a strange sense of symmetry. The same desert that had almost buried her now kept bringing her back to the living. That evening, Tessa found her there, the journal open on her lap. "New entry?" Tessa asked. "Something like that." "What's the topic?" Maya smiled. "Mercy." Tessa sat beside her, knees drawn up. "You really think it changes anything? The world's still out there, breaking itself." "It does," Maya said softly, "but not the world, people, one at a time." Tessa nodded. "And what about you? You ever think about going back out there? Missions command." Maya looked at the horizon where dusk met gold. "No, I think I finally know when to stop fighting." The two women sat in silence, listening to the wind move through the hangar. Maya thought of her father again, of the quiet porch in Tucson, of Lena's laughter, of the photograph she'd left framed beside his Ranger tab. He'd told her once that courage wasn't noise, it was direction. Now she understood. The fight had never been the point. The point was knowing when to walk away with your dignity intact. The next morning, she woke before dawn and drove to the edge of the desert alone. She parked where the tarmac ended and the sand began, stepped out barefoot, and let the cold ground bite at her skin. The sky was still dark, that rare, perfect silence before sunrise when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She opened her journal one last time and read aloud the final line she'd written the night before. "Sometimes the only way to win is to stop measuring victory in enemies defeated and start measuring it in hearts changed, including your own." She closed the book gently and set it on the hood of the truck. The sun broke the horizon, spilling light across the desert. Maya stood there, eyes closed, breathing it in. She was Raven anymore. She wasn't the soldier who'd crawled through hell or the ghost who haunted its edges. She was just a woman who had learned that survival was not about endurance, it was about meaning. And meaning, she realized, was mercy with roots. She turned, climbed into the truck, and started the engine. As the tires cut through the sand, her voice, calm, low, steady, would carry as the final narration, the way a story ends not with a bang but with truth. The desert never promised mercy, it promised truth. "It burned until I understood that strength isn't how loud you fight, it's how quietly you rise again. I left pieces of myself out there, but maybe that's how survival works. You trade parts of your past for a chance at grace." She looked into the mirror, the reflection of dawn glowing behind her. "They left me to die in the desert. But the desert taught me how to live." The music would swell softly, strings, low percussion, the sound of wind blending into breath. As the truck disappeared into the horizon, the camera would hold for a long moment the empty road, the wide sky, the endless quiet. Then fade to black. Her final words, soft as a promise, would echo one last time. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts."